not again. Well, I guess this is a good opportunity to tell you about the problems we're having with this truck. So today I'm going to go over a common problem on Chevy Duramax trucks. And if you've had a Duramax for any length of time, you may have already encountered this, or if you haven't, more than likely at some point you will encounter this problem. This is one of our work trucks. We've had this same problem with it at least 2 times. This might be the 3rd or even 4th time we've had this similar issue. And it's applicable on almost any diesel engine. What happens is you may start the truck and it'll run briefly. So that might mean it'll run for a matter of seconds or a matter of minutes, or at first this problem can be very spontaneous. You may be driving down the road or stop at a stoplight and the truck just shuts off, and you cannot get it to run again until you come over to your primer pump, which is in over here where your fuel filter connects to, and repressurize that primer pump. Once you repressurize the fuel system with the primer pump, then your truck will start and run again. Sometimes it'll run for a while, sometimes it'll stop immediately. Now I have to say, if your truck won't start at all, it could be this problem, but it could also be a lot of other things. So you might check some other things to start with, like electrical system, make sure your starter relays and your fuses and all that stuff are good. But if you're having an issue where your truck will start and run and sporadically stops, or will start and it runs for just a minute or 2 or a few seconds and shuts off, there's a really good chance that it's a problem like this. Now the essence of this problem is actually air entering the fuel system, and that is before it reaches the injector pump. And the reason I say that is, if you're having a fuel problem after it reaches the injector pump, then it's on the high pressure side. And if it's outside of the engine on the high pressure side, it'll be pretty obvious because there'll be high pressure fuel squirting out somewhere. If the leak is on the high pressure side after the injector pump, and it's on the internal part of the engine, like some of the internal injector lines or the injectors themselves, then you won't be able to physically see that. But what will happen is the gas, or the diesel, I'm sorry, will actually squirt into your valve covers, and it'll end up going into your engine oil, causing an overflow or an overfill type situation. That is not the problem we're going to talk about right this second, however. Just for diagnosis purposes, you have to understand that these problems happen before you get to the injector pump. So that would be somewhere between the fuel tank itself and the injector pump. And most commonly, this is found somewhere around your fuel filter. So let's take a look at this real quick, and I'll show you common problems. So this is your regular Duramax fuel filter, and it goes from the 1st generation Duramaxes. And this filter will go all the way up till probably about the 17 model. I'm not positive on that. But it goes for a long span of the early Duramaxes. So it's a canister type filter. And this is where your water separator / fuel filter is all in one unit. So at the bottom of here is when your water separator screws into this. And when you have it apart from the truck, the bottom of the water drain valve looks like this. And it has a float on it like this, with the sensor that'll signal you if needed. Well, this sensor has an O-ring, a rubber gasket around the bottom, and it screws up into the bottom of your filter like this. This O-ring, if this O-ring goes bad, you can suck air into the fuel system, and it'll give you that trouble with the truck starting but not continuing to run. Sometimes it may not start at all if there's a lot of air in the system. So another reason that you could look for that could be a problem is when you get a new filter, it comes with these 2 gaskets. And this O-ring is the one we just talked about on the bottom. This O-ring actually goes in the top of the filter right here and goes up against your filter head, and that's where your fuel primer and your diesel fuel heater is. So if this O-ring is not making good contact, sometimes you'll notice this problem when the temperature changes, whether or not it gets hot and your truck won't start, or if it gets cold and your truck won't start and you have to reprime the system. Anytime that you have to reprime and push the primer pump to build up fuel pressure to restart your engine, that's a telltale sign that you're getting air in the fuel system somewhere. So it could be from this bottom one, it could be from this top O-ring. If you've recently changed the filter and you tightened it with a filter wrench, it could possibly even have a pinhole in the filter itself. That's unlikely, but it's possible. So let me show you a couple of those. Are a couple of the simple things that could be wrong with it. Let me show you a couple of the other things that could be wrong with it. So this right here is a brand new filter head assembly for the Duramax, and we'll take a look at this, but right here under the hood is where this is at. It's basically on the passenger side behind the driver's side wheel. So the filter screws onto this assembly like so, and your in and out fuel lines go in here. It has directional arrows in and out. So a couple other reasons it could give you this problem is several things with this filter head assembly. One, either of these two lines right here have hose clamps on them. If those hose clamps go bad, it could suck air into the system and cause your fuel pressure to bleed down, or cause you to lose any sort of fuel pressure. Now, when you have to restart the vehicle, of course, you end up having to push this primer 5 or 8 or 20 times. If you find yourself having to push it 30 or 40 times, there's definitely a problem in your fuel line somewhere, or in your fuel system before your injector pump. But this is what would increase your pressure in order and allow you to start the truck again. However, the gaskets that seal here on the top of the filter, or these hose clamps right here, could be bad. This is your bleeder screw, and there's a rubber gasket underneath of this. That could be bad also. And then long term with the Duramaxes, these pumps, these pressure pumps right here, will go bad. If you've never had this problem before, this would be a good place to start, is just to check all these fittings. Make sure there's no diesel fuel or anything that you can see that's wet on the top. Make sure that there's no diesel fuel wet around these hose clamps. Check your filter. When it's on the truck, you can check your filter and make sure it's not wet around here, or wet or leaking down here. Or make sure that your drain valve, there's an O-ring right in here. Make sure it's not wet anywhere. Make sure it's not obvious where the diesel fuel is leaking out, because if the diesel fuel can get out, then air can for sure get in. Now, if you've checked all that and you can't seem to find it, it's very possible it's internal. So the first thing you can do is you can buy a rebuild kit for this primer pump. And these rebuild kits only cost you about $25. They come with all the O-rings that you'll need, and you'll have to take off these. You have to take the filter head off the truck, like this one is off now. And then you'd have to take this off, which is the heater for the diesel fuel. You'd end up taking that out with this screw right here. And then you take these 3 screws out, and this whole assembly comes out with a spring, and it has O-rings in there that can all be replaced. You can put it all back together and make it fully sealed and functional again. So about 75 to 80% of the time, if it's not one of the external problems, that will solve your problem with your truck starting and stalling. However, if you've already done that and it doesn't seem to work, or if you've done that multiple times, or like in this case on this truck has 280,000 miles on it. And it's already been rebuilt several times, so the pump has. So in this situation, we decided just to buy a complete new filter head assembly. You can do that too. I called the dealership on these, It almost made me throw up. They wanted $500 for this filter head assembly, so I said no thank you. I ordered it offline. This is a Dorman. It cost me just a little over $100 for the assembly. I've seen them as cheap as about 50 bucks, but I usually don't go with the cheapest part I can find. I go with something that's somewhat of a recognizable name. So I decided to replace this fuel head assembly instead of just rebuilding the pump this time, and I'll tell you why. Since it has so many miles on this truck, I've never replaced the heater in here. Also, underneath this heater, and right here there's a check valve, which is a ball with a spring-loaded assembly right there. Underneath it here, there is also a rubber opening with a spring, and it is non-serviceable. It's a non-serviceable part. So when you get the rebuild kit for this, you do not get the O-rings or the rubber stopper part that's underneath of this. Normally that doesn't go bad, but it's kind of like a one-way diesel valve that opens up, allows the diesel to come through one direction and not let it backflow the other direction. It's underneath of this heater assembly. I figure at this point, if I spend the time and the effort to get all of this out, I'm going to spend 25 or 30 bucks for the rebuild kit, I might as well just go ahead and replace the heater assembly, and all the non-serviceable parts comes with the wiring and the electric at the same time. As far as I know, it's never been replaced before. So that's a route I'm going to go this time around to try to get this truck running. So hopefully those are the first couple things that you can check, and hopefully one of those things will be your problem. There are a few other things that you can look for if it's still losing prime. Obviously, you'll have to check your fuel lines from the point where it enters this fuel head assembly all the way back to the tank. Make sure they're not rusted or broke or leaking. If they're rusted or broke or leaking, you're definitely getting air in the fuel system, and it's not going to be one of these components, or you won't know if it's one of these components until you repair the problem with the fuel line that goes back to the tank. In the Duramax, there is no fuel pump in the tank. There's just a sending unit for your fuel gauge on the dash. The only thing that gets the fuel from your tank up to the injector pump is the actual injector pump. There is no lift pump on the Duramax trucks on the earlier versions. So the air can enter the system at any point in there. So definitely check all your lines before you take all this stuff apart. From the fuel bag, just get under your truck with a flashlight, make sure there's no diesel fuel, make sure they're not leaking or rusted, make sure these connections are good, make sure that there's no diesel fuel anywhere that you can see. If there is, start there. If there's not, then secondly, you can start right here rebuilding this pump. If that doesn't work, you can change the whole assembly. You just want to spend a little extra money, jump right forward, you can change this whole assembly to start with. Then most likely you know that there's nothing wrong here as you move forward with your diagnosis. The other things you might find can cause this problem is, for instance, some electrical issues. And let's take a look under the hood real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with that. So another thing I've found and I've heard is that if you're out in the country or you're somewhere that has a problem where you might get mice, or probably your truck may sit for a while, what you might find is that in your fuse box here, and not the top part is not what I'm referring to, but I'm talking about underneath of this whole electrical center, you'll find that mice love to make nests underneath of this. The most two common places I ever find mice nesting is under this electrical box, and you'll find them a lot of times right in here in your air filter also. They like to make nests right in there. So, you know, they can access this in a lot of different spots, especially around the bottom. So you might pull this off and look inside there to see if there's any sort of wiring that's been chewed on underneath of there. I hear that some people have problems with that. So if your truck is starting or running a little bit and then stopping, you might check that. Of course, check all your starter relays and all your fuses and things like that here, as well as the one that's you know, right inside the door panel on the driver's side. You want to check all those fuses. So if you check those things, you might find the cause. And then, as I said, check your filter to make sure that there's no diesel fuel or anything that's wet where the lines hook up, just like here. And, you know, back in there, make sure there's no areas where you find any wet diesel fuel. If you are pushing your primer pump, which is right here, and you see fuel coming out somewhere at the bottom, then you'll know that there's a problem. But, you know, this is all the components we talked about before, and they're located right here in the engine. And then getting this off is actually pretty easy because there's just 2 hose clamps right over here that you can get them off. And then if you go down the side, take off the inside fender protection, and you can get to the filter really easy down here. And then you can check it to see if it's leaking there. So this is also the easiest way to put your filter back on. So hopefully this gives you a help of maybe what to look for if your truck is starting but doesn't continue to run. So hey, thanks for watching my videos again. Hopefully this has helped you. It is a common problem that you'll find with the Duramax trucks. Eventually you'll end up changing that primer, those primer pump with the rebuild kit, or you will have some problems with air coming in the fuel system and your truck's going to stall out on you or won't start in hot or cold weather, something like that. So give that some thought. Hopefully that's helped you. Hopefully you'll figure out the problem, and I'm going to get to fixing this one. So keep watching my videos and subscribe to my channel and share these things so that other people know the problems too. Thanks again.